Hey guys, so we are back with Old Britannia. We are looking at part 2 of his two-parter, The War Aims of Each Nation in World War One. So last video I found very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more about what each nation had hoped to accomplish, or their best case scenarios, I call it, after the War of World War One. So, yeah. I don't really have much else to say other than we should probably get to it. And I'm wondering what other nations he's gonna cover, because I know the Ottoman is a pretty big central power he didn't cover last time. From then on, I'm not sure who else, but I guess we'll see. And before I get started, if you want to watch the original video by Old Britannia, the link is down in the description down below. It's always the first. And if you enjoy my content and want to help support me in any way, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It would really help my small but humble channel out a lot, and I would appreciate it a lot. With that said, and now without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch the war aims of each nation in World War Uno, Part 2 by Old Britannia.
As the First World War raged between the five great powers of Europe, fighting for continental and potentially world supremacy, stuck in between these behemoths were several smaller nations, each pursuing their own more limited territorial goals in the conflict. Since its unification...
Oh, Italy. If I'm remembering correctly, Italy wanted a lot more territory at the end of this war that they didn't get. They did get something, though I don't think it's what they wanted. I think I heard that was a big point of contention for World War II, and that they were upset at their meager gains from this war, despite fighting for the winning side. I could be wrong about that, don't quote me. I'm pretty sure it was Italy, though it could have been someone else. Apologies if I got that wrong, but I could have sworn to remember hearing something like that.
In the mid-19th century, Italy's statesmen had tried to present her as a great power in the concert of Europe. In reality, it was clear she was not. Why on earth should Italy demand an increase in territory? A Russian diplomat remarked to Bismarck in 1878. Has she lost another battle? Yet, as the war got underway...
Ooh, burn! Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, like, Italy wasn't a major power compared to the likes of these guys, right? And I think the kingdom, even at this point, was still young. It was, like, you know, at least in terms of its formation, considering how fractured Italy was. Basically, after the fall of the West of the Roman Empire, right? So yeah, that's interesting.
And Italy remained neutral, forsaking the Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria as a purely defensive arrangement. She suddenly became the most attractive potential ally in Europe. This left her in a position to extract territorial concessions from both the Entente and Central powers. Germany attempted to maintain Italy's neutrality by bribing her with Austrian territory, including the Trentino region. This offer was far below Italy's expectations. Her political elite were generally made up of Anglophiles, whilst the country itself was dependent on British coal and other resources. Added to this were the territories the Entente were prepared to promise Italy, effectively everything Rome wanted from the Habsburg Empire, uniting the Italian minorities in these regions. The annexation of this land would also give her uncontested supremacy in the Adriatic. The Entente further sweetened the pot with the promise of a protectorate over Albania, territory from the Ottoman Empire, and a large subsidy from Britain. All of this proved too much of a temptation for Italian statesmen to resist, leading them to enter the war, albeit to much popular opposition.
Yeah, that's quite the pitch there. Like, it's almost irresistible, right? Compared to the pitch that the Entente gave compared to Germany.
On the 23rd of May 1915. Italy was unfortunate that the Austrians, their main opposition in the conflict, held one of the best defensive positions in Europe, the Isonzo River, and so she was unable to seize most of her claimed lands until late 1918. Britain and France were consequently sceptical as to whether the Italian contribution had been worth the bribes offered to induce her into the conflict, especially after the Caporetto debacle had forced them to redeploy troops from the Western Front just before the German spring offensives. One British diplomat was frankly contemptuous, saying, "As for the Italians, what can you expect from a nation the majority of which would be better employed selling ice cream?" It was an unfair assessment, but shows something of the Anglo-French.
Dang, dude. Italy catching L's from everybody. Yeah, that's just a bad position. The defensive position that Austria-Hungary had, that was just bad luck there, right? So they couldn't have contributed as far as they wanted to, or go as far as they wanted to. Just kind of leading their allies to be like, oh, was it even worth it talking to these people? So that sucks.
Thought process of the peace discussions. As such, Italy was denied the full territorial compensation it had originally been promised, mainly on the Wilsonian basis of national self-determination. The result was a nation that felt cheated, and was consequently to become a revisionist power in the post-war world.
Shopping is hard.
Okay, so I was correct. I was remembering that, yeah, the Italians didn't get as much as they were promised or wanted, so that kind of led to some, contemptuous ideas later on, right? So, yeah, bitter feelings and whatnot. Okay, that makes sense. And the Ottomans now.
Of all the nations that entered the First World War willingly, the Ottoman Empire's decision must be the most bizarre. By 1914, the country was in a tenuous position, with most of its huge debt held by foreign powers. More recently, she had continued her steady decline and lost further territories in both the Balkan and Italo-Turkish wars. A sensible plan in 1914 would then have been to remain neutral and extract concessions from both sides. For the most part, the Sublime Porte agreed with this assessment, but a few high-ranking officials, led by the War Minister Enver Pasha, saw conflict as a preferable outcome. They feared that if Turkey did not pick a side, then she would be partitioned by whichever grouping was victorious. War would also provide an opportunity for the Porte to shed its immense debt burden and assert its independence from both the Entente and Central Powers, as well as avenging the seizure of 2 dreadnoughts by the British at the start of the war, paid for by popular subscription, though Britain had offered financial compensation. Territorial claims weren't actually Turkey's main concern, but it was hoped they may be able to force the Russians back from the Caucasus, and so set up buffer states, thus protecting them from future Russian expansionism. It was also believed the defeat of the Entente may leave the door open for the domination of Persia, and perhaps even the re-establishment of Ottoman authority over Egypt. Theoretically a Turkish client until 1914, but de facto under British rule. The Turks had also made clear that if Greece joined the war, they desired the Aegean Islands, and there was some talk of retaking Cyprus and Crete. Never a realistic proposition.
There's a lot that they want, huh? Obviously with the depths, the expansionists, like there seems to be like a lot, that they want, though obviously in a realistic sense, as we know, they didn't get. They fell apart, but yeah, like I'm not sure how realistic of. It seems very idealistic, right? How much they wanted. Yeah, I guess almost unrealistic in a sense of they probably wouldn't have gotten all that.
The capitulation of Russia in 1918 did allow the Turks to move into the Caucasus, though it's debatable as to whether they or the Germans would have dominated the region had the Central Powers would. In the end, the Ottomans suffered the exact fate they joined the war to avoid. The empire.
Yeah, they were afraid of being partitioned, and that's exactly what happened to them. That's kind of hilarious. They kind of fulfilled a prophecy in a sense like that. You know, or they made their own greatest fears come to light at the end. So yeah, that sucks too.
Was partitioned by the Entente in the wake of their victory, though under the brilliant leadership of Mustafa Kemal, they would reverse the most devastating of the territorial concessions to found the modern nation of Turkey. Serbia's rejection of an Austrian ultimatum in 1914 that would.
This is an interesting one. I'm assuming that their objective would be to survive and not be destroyed. um, he did mention last video that there were Serbian like territories still a part of the Habsburg empires, so I'm assuming they would want those territories, right, to unite more Serbs under Serbia. That this is just an assumption, you know, on my part though.
Have effectively turned them into a vassal of Vienna, led to the start of the war. The Serbs in 1914 were an immensely self-confident nation, having recently won 2 Balkan wars which almost doubled their territory. Naturally then, the war was seen as the long-awaited opportunity to seize the Slav-inhabited areas of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When Italy entered the war in 1915, the Entente tried to reconcile both Rome and Belgrade's designs, which clashed over areas such as the Dalmatian coast. As such, Serbia was assigned these lands at the end of the war. The Serbs failed to take this territory themselves, instead being overrun by a joint Central Powers invasion in 1915. But their war effort continued from exile. The Corfu Declaration in 1917 announced Serbia's intention to form a Yugoslav state, and, with the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the war, Serbia was apportioned even more of the former Habsburg territories than it had been promised before, even dethroning the King of Montenegro to create a Yugoslav state. Superficially, the war was then a major success, but the enormous devastation of Serbia, resulting in the deaths of perhaps 25% of its mobilised population, meant the victory was arguably the most bittersweet of any nation.
Typical video editors are...
Yeah, considering they got jumped and whatnot, I guess just surviving kind of was a great reward in itself. Though obviously, again, like that's the thing. I keep calling these the best case scenarios in the idea that this is what they want, right? All these territorial expansions, but like realistically, probably not attainable. And yeah, that's kind of the disappointing reality of life, huh? Sometimes you just have to take what you can get, and you know, you can't have everything you want, so yeah.
Bulgaria played the part of a mercenary in the early stages of the war, waiting to see which side could stump up the better territorial offer. The Entente, particularly Britain, were largely sympathetic to the Bulgarians, and badgered Serbia into offering them territorial concessions, along with the land it had lost to Turkey in the Second Balkan War. But even though the Entente may have offered easy pickings, for the beleaguered Ottomans were unlikely to have survived a Bulgarian assault, they were nonetheless slim. The Central Powers, on the other hand, were prepared to offer the Bulgarians all of the parts of Serbia they wanted, along with a token strip from the Turks. In 1916, these aims expanded with the entry of Romania on the side of the Entente. The same happened in 1917 with the entry of Greece, which would have allowed Bulgaria to retake land lost in the Second Balkan War. There were also more far-fetched ideas about seizing an outlet on the Adriatic, but these were never concrete plans. Bulgarian aims looked something like this then, which, had she been able to hold...
Okay, Bulgaria claims southern occupied on the map, but the territory is subject to infighting among the Central Powers who would actually be awarded it. Okay.
them would have ensured hegemony over the Balkans. As it was, the Bulgarian government's gamble came back to haunt them. Their population starving, their army defeated, they were stripped of further land by the victorious Entente. Romania entered...
Yeah, boy, that backfired. That didn't work out so well, huh? Oh, that sucks.
...the war opportunistically in 1916. She had previously been within the Triple Alliance's sphere of influence, but had been edging towards the Entente's camp in the prelude to 1914. She joined the conflict when it seemed as if Austria-Hungary was on the verge of defeat. Her aims were focused on taking Transylvania and Bukovina, promised to her in the Treaty of Bucharest, which would largely unify Greater Romania. As it was, Romania joined too late to truly exploit Austrian weakness in the aftermath of the Brusilov offensive. Instead, its largely outdated army was quickly routed. Nevertheless, the nation wasn't defeated. What remained of their forces reorganised with Russian aid and proved quite effective for the rest of the conflict. But they were left in an impossible position in early 1918, when Russia exited the war. Consequently, they signed a devastating separate peace with the Central Powers, though they were given Bessarabia from the collapsing Russian state in compensation. Ultimately though, the king refused to ratify the treaty, a gamble that was to pay off later that year. In late 1918, with Habsburg power collapsing, Romania re-entered the war, so as to have a say in the post-war settlement. The Entente, keen to bring the hammer down on the Hungarians, apportioned Romania practically all of the land it hoped for.
Okay, much of this would have to be fought for in the Hungarian-Romanian War, which is outside the scope of this video. There were also a few I'm sorry, the words kind of blending into the map there. Complaints that the Entente had denied Romania their rightful frontier on the Tisza.
It's perhaps ironic that the only Entente power to actually be forced into making a separate peace was also the one to come out of the conflict.
Though Russia would of course also make peace in 1918, I class the Soviet Union as a different entity from the Empire and Republic.
With far more than it had first aimed for. The only nation in Europe that the outbreak of war was potentially good for was Greece.
Okay, so wait, so they did get that right. I'm sorry, looking back.
Perhaps ironic that the only Entente power to actually be forced into making a separate peace was also the one to come out of the conflict with far more than it had first aimed for.
Wow. Good on Romania.
The only nation in Europe...
Okay, so Greece. You know, I do know about the idea of, it's called the Megali idea of Greece, which was a very ambitious territorial expansion, right? Taking all the way here to Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, and even going into Anatolia and taking a lot of areas where Greeks speak. A very idealistic and optimistic idea that probably wasn't realistically attainable. So yeah, I do at least know that. I'm not sure if that is going to be brought up or if that's even going to play a part, but I know they wanted to expand more, right? So I mean, granted, every nation in this video wants to expand more, but I do at least know of the Greek idea of the Megali idea.
That the outbreak of war was potentially good for was Greece. The nation was only weeks off entering into a third Balkan war with the Ottomans over the Aegean Islands, and with two dreadnoughts soon to be arriving at Constantinople, it was unlikely to be one the Greeks would win. In theory then, it would have made perfect strategic sense for the Greeks to harness the Entente's overwhelming naval supremacy by entering the war and secure their safety by defeating Turkey. As it was, Greek politics was irrevocably divided over the war, a division for the sake of brevity I won't go into here. To oversimplify, much of the country wished to side with the Entente, reflected by the nation's brilliant Prime Minister Venizelos, who favoured a scheme proposed by the British that would have seen Greece give land to the Bulgarians, bringing them into the fold, in return for large concessions in Anatolia once the Ottomans were defeated. The king, however, with strong ties to Germany, refused to abandon neutrality. The national schism that followed paralysed Greek foreign policy, and it was not until 1917 the nation tentatively entered the conflict. They were promised major territorial concessions to do so, though notably not Constantinople, a long-held Greek desire. In the end, Greece was apportioned most of what it wanted with the Treaty of Sèvres, which, had Athens been able to hold the territory, would have fulfilled much of the Megali idea. But her attempts to impose Greek authority in Asia Minor were thwarted in the Greco-Turkish War. In almost all cases, the great powers tried to tempt these minor countries into the war with exaggerated promises of territory that only later served to get in the way of a negotiated peace. The Austrian Emperor's tentative peace offers, for example, were rebuffed in 1917 by the Entente, on the basis the Italians would understandably not be willing to abandon their war aims after so much bloodshed. Most arguably overperformed militarily, but diplomatically, the cost to either the Entente or Central Powers was probably not worth it.
I used to spend
Yeah. Alright, so I'm really happy to have learned what everyone wanted from World War One. That was something I was really interested in, especially with the Central Powers. So overall, a great video from a very informative and just great YouTuber from Old Britannia. And yeah, guys, we'll end it right here, and I'll see you guys tomorrow when we do something else. Bye, everyone.